Welcome back to the Health, Weight Loss and Wellness Show. And today I have an amazing speaker for you. I want to introduce to you Edie Nathan. Edie is an author, a speaker, a licensed therapist. She's a certified sex therapist, hypnotherapist, certified EMDR practitioner. I got that right, with more than 20 years experience. We are so blessed today. Edie earned degrees from New York University and Fordham University with a postgraduate training at the Awaecnan Institute of Family Therapy. In her expertise as a grief therapist, she interweaves her formal training as a psychotherapist with breath work, guided imagery, ritual, and storytelling. And Edie says trauma, abuse, and grief causes the soul to be imbalanced. The goal of the work is to find emotional calibration or balance to defy the depths of darkness grief has often on the psyche. I just felt that was just so amazing reading that. So thank you so much for being here, Edie. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Jody. Yeah.
Oh, great. And now, look, you have an interesting story, and I really would like if you would like to share your story of how you got here to what you're doing today.
Grief takes us on paths that we really don't expect. And it opens us up to learning about ourselves in ways that we never expected. And grief comes in not just when we have a loss of a family member or a child or a grandparent. It comes in many different ways. And I was actually an overweight teenager that went into adulthood. And I was carrying a lot of grief in that weight. I was carrying a weight that felt so heavy, and I couldn't explain it. I couldn't express it. I went on diets, and my parents sent me to fat camps, and you know, they did their best to, you know, really help me fight the demon of this weight and this heaviness that I walked with. And I felt older than my years, and I felt like an outsider, and I felt isolated. And all of those pieces make one feel like they're grieving, but they can't name it. And once learning within my own storyline where I was holding my grief, it was in my gut, it was in my heart, it was in my head, it was in my feet. And I'll talk about that. But once I was able to identify what was going on for me and the grief, and I was able to basically talk to those parts of myself and love those parts of myself, I learned that hunger wasn't devastating, that I could partner with it, that I could dance with it, that I could come alive with it, and that I wasn't going to crumble if I was hungry. And I could identify different levels of hunger. And as a result, the weight began to fall off. And the weight came off in just bits and pieces throughout my life until I got to a place where I'm satisfied enough. Because I think there's always that vestige of, oh, I didn't make it. I didn't become this skinny woman. And yet it's okay, because I love my curves. And it makes, I think, us as women stand out to say, I own who I am. And that ownership was me learning how to dance with my grief.
Yeah, beautiful. I mean, how did you discover that it was actually grief?
It was through a lot of my own personal work, through therapy, and actually I lost my partner when I was 28 years old. And in losing my partner, it was devastating. And I still had some weight to lose. I wasn't like the weight that I had been, but it struck me, oh my God, like like this grief that I am carrying, all I want to do is numb myself. And that means I want to swallow, I want to eat, I want to just keep it all down. And it really helped me to align myself and see that the journey of being able to lose the weight was a journey of taking the grief and saying, these were I created like a timeline. And that timeline was, where were there fractures in my life? Where had there been pain? Where had there been abuse? Where had there been bullying? Where had there been isolation? And once I created that timeline, I was able to go into those very fractured times and talk to the part of myself that lived then. And I was able to hold her and nourish her and hear her and listen. Listening is so important. And I think the one thing that we often do when we're grieving is we stop listening. All we want to do is say, no, you're going to stay over there and I'm going to stay over here and I am not going to meet you. And it was really, I talk about this in my book, and part of the reason my subtitle for my book, It's Grief, The Dance of Self-Discovery Through Trauma and Loss, is because it is a dance. It is an integrative dance. It is sometimes the twist and sometimes the cha-cha, and sometimes you're just freestyling until it feels delicious and you can feel yourself. And that's what it is with grief.
Yeah, I love that. And I love how you call it a dance, because I think that gives you a different feeling of your grief. And like you said, we do avoid it and we're scared of it. And we're scared of feeling these emotions. I'm not actually sure where that comes from, but we're scared of actually feeling. And so you're right, we do numb it down. And some people use food, some people use drugs, some people use alcohol, shopping, gambling, smoking, avoidance, overhelping, donating yourself and your time to others. So, I think for some reason we're scared of it. And so you talking about it as a dance, it just feels more like it's something that's going to ebb and flow. I'm a dancer, so I resonate with that. So it feels like something that you're going to ebb and flow, and something that's going to lead you and guide you around the floor, rather than this scary place that you're going to go to and stay there. And I always like to say, and I've mentioned this, I think in another interview, is I say, visit the house of, your emotion, grief, or anger or sadness. Go in and visit the house and look around and check out the furniture, but then leave. So I think a lot of people are fear to go there because they feel like it's going to overwhelm them. So if somebody, say, wants to really supercharge their health, right? So we're looking at health, weight loss, and wellness. So in those areas, or just one of those areas, say someone's looking at, okay, well, I want to supercharge my health, I want to supercharge my wellness, or I want to really supercharge my weight loss. What would be your first go-to? What would be your advice, so to speak, of where they should probably start with that?
So starting with the self is always a really good place. And I think about this house that you're talking about, and I actually refer to the house in my work, and I talk about the foundation. You need to spend time building the foundation, because if you don't have a good foundation, you can't build the house. Yeah. And so that foundation, what does it consist of? Maybe it consists of concrete, and maybe it consists of memories, and maybe it consists of your stories, and maybe it consists of trauma, and maybe it consists of a lost love. And so the work begins in that foundation. The psyche really goes into that foundation. It lives in that foundation. It pivots from that foundation, and learning how to be in it, not be afraid of it, but say, what can you teach me and what can I teach you? And not to get healthy or lose weight or go into a wellness program for someone else,
Yeah.
because it just doesn't work. If you do it for yourself and you say, I'm going to do this. If I tried to lose weight for my family, it was never going to work. And it didn't. The minute it was important to me, the minute it was about how am I going to love me? How am I going to take myself on around this? How am I going to be in this journey that is filled with fortitude and guts and fear and angst, and being able to tackle it head on and say, okay, this is hard. And it's a yes, and this is hard. Yes. And I deserve it.
Yeah.
I deserve to tackle it. And I like to think about the story of the Wizard of Oz and all of the different, aspects really of herself that she met. So we had the Tin Man, and we had the Scarecrow, and we had the Lion, and we had the Good Witch, and we had the Evil Witch, and we had, the Wizard. And, they were all parts of her. And then she had these shoes, and she never realized that she had these shoes and they had power. But until she met all of these parts of herself, her brain and her heart and her courage and her willingness to fight evil and her willingness to come outside of the curtain and say, oh my God, here I am, then she really couldn't see her power. But it was that journey that allowed her to take herself on and move into the self.
I love that. And as you're saying that, I'm like, yes, the Wizard of Oz really is parts therapy.
Yes.
I mean, we do parts therapy, right, with clients, because we've got all these different parts of us. And so I'm just thinking about that, and it's really a metaphor, the slippers that she does. She's always had the power within her. And that, I think they kind of allude to that at the end. But yeah, very, maybe that's why it resonated with so many people.
That's right.
Because it's the different parts of you, and I think
that's right, and it's evergreen. They're very much archetypal. The archetypal collective unconscious. The parts of ourselves that we may not want to see, like the evil witch. And on the journey of wellness, what we struggle with may be aspects of the self that we don't want to see, that we can't see, that we would rather ignore or put apart from us. And so many parts of our body need to be fed. It's just a matter of sometimes we think if we feed it with drugs, or we feed it with alcohol, or we feed it with food or shopping, that somehow we're soothing it. And in a way, we're really not.
I feel like it's like a searching. We're searching for something. There's something missing. We're feeling something. We're searching for the answer, and then we go to all these outward things rather than inward. So I'm curious as well. So I've got some curiosity around grief. So there's a couple of questions. So how does grief affect the body, and can we hold weight, in our body because there's grief? Does grief have a weight on us? I know that we can get into some habits around eating our grief, but do you feel like it holds weight on our body?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. I mean, I look at someone who's really struggling, and I know myself, I've struggled, and clients who have struggled. And most of the time, not all the time, there's a grief story, there's a trauma story, there's an attachment of that story that has hit the head, the brain, and the brain is very important, hit the heart, hit the gut, hit the feet, and hit the soul, and it's hit it at every different place within our bodies. And when it strikes like that, when trauma hits us, it's not invited. Grief is uninvited, so is trauma. It's not like we walk down the street saying, all right, trauma, I'm ready, come on, It's not like that at all, right? And usually our bodies are not prepared. We're feeling safe, we're feeling good, we're feeling great. And then out of nowhere,
Mm.
something happens where there's unwanted sexual advances, rape, there's parents who ridicule and hurt, there's teasing, there's bullying, there's financial issues, there's there's so many different levels of abuse, physical, emotional, sexual. So no one asks for those bits of trauma ever, and usually they come when you're feeling okay, you're feeling safe. You didn't think that the date you were on was going to turn bad until it does.
Yeah.
And so even when you feel safe, you're always waiting for something bad to happen, and you're ready to take flight. And that is why sometimes when we think we're feeling safe, we might eat. We might need to nourish something that is feeling or perceiving danger, because safety, when you've been traumatized, is not the safety that someone who's never been traumatized feels.
Mm. And do you think there's like an inflammation? If I'm just was listening to you there, and I'm thinking, if we trauma and it creates stress, and then stress creates inflammation, do you feel like it's a stress, like
It's
body,
absolutely.
your what do you call it, your uh, electrical system, I wanted to say, not your nervous system. Do you feel
your limbic system, your nervous system? Absolutely.
maybe it's always on edge, and it's
yes, you're always on edge. That's
Mhm.
right. And so your cortisol is affected, and the way that your brain functions and the neural pathways in the brain are greatly affected. And what we certainly know is that when someone is grieving, when they are in a deep state of grief, and they go through the many phases of grief, that grief does not follow any certain path. It just likes to take its own time and meander through all of what I call the 11 phases, and there's no one right way to go about it. The thing is that your body is affected, and it can land with swelling, it can land with jaw issues, with grinding of the teeth, when there's a lack of self-care because you are grieving. What we know is when you don't take care of your teeth, it can affect the heart, and it all starts because you're grieving.
Yeah.
So there's a definite trickle down from you're grieving, you're not taking care, you're depressed, you're overwhelmed, your roles are very confused, you've got emotional armor on, you're angry, you're anxious. That anxiety, when it comes in, man, sometimes it comes in, it just plows you down. It comes in such a way, your mouth is dry, you're sweaty, you want to move and you can't. So all of the stress related aspects of grief affect the body, affect functioning, affect sexual functioning, affect the ability to think straight, affect the ability to maneuver through work life and being relational. And you may find that you move from being relational to being much more transactional, which is not personal. And when you're transactional, it's like you've left your body.
Yeah. So it's incredible when you really unpack it and you think about grief. It's not just someone passing, it's a loss that you're experiencing, and that could be loss of your childhood, or loss of your, youth, or, for midlife women, it can be, the loss of your former self, or your health, or your energy, or your zest for life. And
Correct.
I find that transition from, you could do everything and had all the energy, to a lot of women suffering through perimenopause and menopause. You've got to grieve the old you. You've got to say goodbye, because that's not you anymore. And if you don't do that, you sit in the past thinking about the old you, rather than going, okay, well, how am I going to thrive with the new me? So I think it's really important to do that work. Well, if somebody is experienced grief, or they know someone that's grieving, or there's something that I think we've all kind of suffered a loss. If we go down that road, we've all kind of suffered a loss of some sort, whether it's a person or parts of us, or an old a life, or something we can't do anymore. If somebody was grieving, what would you say would be your number one go to, even if say they've been suffering even all their life, or even not just situation, this grief, or the grief or the trauma that they've experienced and they've suffered their whole life with it, what would be your number one go-to step? Like what would they say, or what do they do? Yeah.
Right. Good question. Number one, I think anybody who comes in and says, I've never had a time in my life when I wasn't grieving. I again think it's very, very important to say, wait a minute, have you ever laughed? Have you ever been jolly? Have you ever experienced just one moment of elation? And if they say yes, one moment, then it's not always.
Yeah.
And that our brain is one of our greatest, most unexpected ally in healing.
Yeah.
And our brains and interrupting the messages and becoming a cognitive interrupter to the messages that you're giving yourself, like I am always grieving, needs to be interrupted. Yeah. Or I will always struggle with my weight needs to be interrupted. So becoming a cognitive interrupter, which means you're giving yourself different messages. You're noticing when you give yourself the message of downfall, of grief, of victim, and interrupting it, because you are not, one aspect of you is this issue. It is not all of you, and you don't need to make it all of you.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I feel like listening to that, what comes up for me is that, oh shit, I have to do something about it, right? So I can't just be a victim to it, I guess. Well, that's my talk. So for me, if I think about the loss of the super fit, active person that I was before perimenopause, before the chronic fatigue, and I have to grieve the loss of her, or I had to grieve the loss of her. So listening to that, what comes up for me is like, oh shit, I have to actually do something about it. I can't just sit here in it and complain about it. Well, I can, but nothing's ever going to change. So, that going back to that basics, that foundation of how we talk and what we're saying to ourselves. And I guess for me, if I want to put it in a perspective, for me, it would be like, rather than talking about what I used to do and who I was, focusing on who I am now. Because if I didn't go through what I went through, I wouldn't be the person I am today. And I'm so grateful for that. I learned so much in this short period in my lifetime of that emotional trauma and the trauma I had on my body. I learned so much from that. I would never change a thing. I would go through it again. Right. At the time, I wouldn't be putting my hand up for it. But what I've learned, I will go through it again. So I guess reframing that, oh, well, I used to, dance 3 times a week and stream sailing and weight training. If I focus on that, I feel like that's depression. But if I come to now and I am just such a different person. That person wasn't happy. She thought she was, but she wasn't truly happy. And so I guess what you're saying in this is reframing our thoughts and doing that work of saying, all right, what is it that I'm saying to myself? What is my story? And change our own stories, because that when we're saying that, it's just reinforcing it over and over that I'm always grieving, and you feel like that you are because you're saying it all the time, you're reinforcing it. And
right, and you're buying into it. You're buying into it, and then you get to be you know, you get to be a victim, and this is about learning how to thrive.
Yeah.
This is about learning how to pivot. It's about learning how to say, I've got superpowers in me, and
Yeah.
those superpowers can help me move ahead. However, I think, those superpowers also enable you to go back and talk to the parts of you lost, because no matter what age you are all the ages up to the age you are.
Yeah.
And whatever you have lost, whatever you have grieved, it's not like the memory of that person is gone. And so she needs to be honored. Yes, I was a dancer. Yes, I exercised. And maybe if you thought you were happy, maybe you were happy. And now your happiness is a different kind of happiness. We don't need to necessarily make it that because we're finished or we've needed to find a different element of being in this world, that one was bad and one is good.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah, so instead of saying this is bad and this is good, that was good for who you were then, and this
Yeah.
is good for who you are now, and both are valid.
Yeah.
And so instead of taking away from yourself, it's already hard enough to say, wow, like, so in my world, I was a big girl and I was teased, and I have compassion for the part of me that was teased, and I have compassion. And did she need to go through that to become the person that I am? Yes. And yet I talk to her, I converse with her. And part of that is sometimes writing letters, sometimes writing a dialogue, because I need to honor who she is and who
Mm.
she was.
That just really felt different to me, like thinking about, I hope you're taking notes in your journals for those who are listening, but and maybe you got something out of this too. But when you said that the older me, that didn't have to be bad for me to be good here, that really resonated with me, because I think I was looking at it as, oh, I've evolved, so there's something wrong with the older me because it wasn't where I am now. But this is the journey, is all one sausage, if we want to look at it like that. It's not just a piece. So that felt, I instantly felt different in my gut when the body connection for me, when I thought of me or her in as, yeah, there was, I think she was pretty happy and proud of herself, and all those. So if I say she wasn't as happy, I'm really taking away from that. And that kind of, if I think about it, it was taking away my pride, taking away, not all of it, but it's taking away the pride that I had at that moment, the achievements that I achieved. And I feel like that was maybe what I was doing to accept the change in me, that I can't do that. So maybe I was saying, oh, well, that was bad, so then I didn't have to go and grieve. Maybe there's some more grief
Yeah,
there.
and say to those parts of the self, you were magnificent, and I miss you. And
Yeah.
I mourn you and know, wow, you existed and you are in my cellular memory, and I will always have you. I will always have you.
That's amazing. I've had an absolute light bulb, light bulb moment right now. I can feel it in me. So I'm busting to go off and do that work. So thank you so much for that. And thank you for allowing me to dive into it and deep into your mind and pull that out, because I hope those listening at home, I'm feeling it. So I hope I'm explaining it, the change, the shift that just happened by looking at it differently and hearing somebody else talking about it in a different way, because we get in our heads, right? So we get in our heads and we have these ideas and we talk through things and we think through things and we feel through things. But sometimes when you're sitting opposite somebody else and they can have a bird's eye view or an outside view and say, hey, have you thought of thinking about it differently? That's when the magic can happen, right? Because sometimes we don't have all the answers. But they are all there, but sometimes we need somebody to turn that light on. So that really was significant for me. And
yes, but there's something else that you did. Number one, you were curious. So that was really important. Number two, though it was a held belief, you were willing to play around with another belief. And the willingness to do that is kind of what helps us heal. It's what helps us like take command and say, you know what? So, okay, I had that, but that has been working for me, but I have an opportunity to maybe think of it differently. And that's where the magic is. That's where you just got in touch with your superpower.
Yeah. And I felt it. I really felt a shift. So I'm hoping those listening at home are really thinking about if there's been a loss or there's been a trauma or there's been something that's changed or shifted in your life, that maybe you're mourning an old part of you, or what you used to have or used to do, or the skinny jeans that you used to fit into that you don't anymore because we're older and we get them out midriff, and that's normal. Maybe rather than saying like separating it as, oh, well, I wasn't as wise, or whatever reason that you're giving, if you are, that you got something out of that too. Celebrate that person that you were, and celebrate all the achievements and the feelings and the happiness and the pride and everything that you achieved along your life. It doesn't have to be, for me, well, it doesn't have to be, there's a fault there because I'm better now.
Right.
So thank you.
It's about really recognizing that you can mourn. And we're talking about mourning an aspect of the self that we lost. And that mourning is just as important as the mourning and the bereavement and the grief that one goes through when they do lose a loved one. And the process is the same, and it is remarkably different. And no one grieves and mourns the same way.
Yeah.
It's as individual as you are. And it's what grief does is it says to you, dare to live. Dare to live.
Yeah.
How are you going to do that?
Oh, I love that so much. I love that so much. That just that lights a fire in my belly. That that dare to live, because I think for me they're the kind of words I think that really being a bit of a rebel, I would say. So like it's like a dare you. So that fires me up, and it really, when I think of dare to live, it just ignites that fire in my belly. But then I start to think about really enjoying every aspect of life, and that doesn't mean I have to go and run up a hill to do that. That could be really deep mindfulness and joy and enjoyment in what I'm doing. So wow, I've just got so much out of this conversation. I hope everyone else at home is getting as much out of it as well. So thank you so much for this. And you have a special gift that you want to give the audience as well. So can you tell us about that?
Certainly. So it's a meditation. You can listen to it anytime. It's an easy download. And it's a meditation about the different parts of the body where you might feel hungry. And that the idea of sometimes you're hungry in your head, and sometimes you're hungry in your heart, and sometimes you're hungry in your gut, and sometimes you're hungry in your feet, and sometimes you're hungry in your soul and your psyche. And it's really a meditation that takes you through all of those different parts so that you can begin to have conversations with the parts of you that want to thrive.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. So generous of you to give that to our audience. And I want to thank you deeply for coming today and sharing your gift with our audience, and for being here and giving us your time.
It's been a pleasure. I've had such a good time, and just a heartfelt time. So thank you for your vulnerability, because vulnerability begets vulnerability. So thank you.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you.